Day one of Foundation actual release. I have been playing this game since 2020 when it was in early access. I think it came out in early access either in 2018 or 2019. I've been playing it for almost 5 years. I've been a modder for all of that time as well. I started modding in the summer of 2020, and I'm very excited to take a crack at updating my mods for the 1.0 release of Foundation, a city builder game by Polymorph Games. This video is for longtime followers of Foundation. I have been playing the game for a long time, and so I've mastered the mechanics of the early access version. This version 1.0 of Foundation is quite different in some aspects, and other aspects will be very familiar. So I'll be first going through starting a new game using the new game menu, which is quite different from the past. Then I'll be exploring my favorite aspects of the new version and how those have changed over early access. The map generator is largely the same as early access. We get the chance to choose between coastal, which has an ocean, fluvial, which has a river, and hills, which has neither. I'm a huge fan of fluvial, but I think for this one I'll go with coastal. We'll make the ocean bigger. We'll make a few more bays. I like a few lakes. Islands are my favorite. Cliffs, we'll reduce that a bit. Hills, I love hills. And we'll increase the slope to get a really big difference between the lowest and the highest elevations. So right now we have a couple of highland lakes. We have a steep descent down to kind of a cliffside in the water, and then we have some high, what look like very hilly islands. I may just reduce the cliffs slightly, and I'm going to re-roll the map with a different seed. Same settings, but different seed. Ooh, this one. Love the island close to the land. It's a short distance. There's a nice cliff, so that's a good bridge opportunity. Good chance to build some farms around the lakes. The rule selection is new in Foundation. This was never possible before, and it's a huge addition to the game. I'm looking forward, hopefully, to being able to mod this experience and perhaps be able to change some other rules. We'll start with the classic experience, which should be similar to early access, but we're going to just make a few adjustments to the rule set. None of the making the game easier rules, I'm not going to change any of those, but I am going to make the game slightly harder. So this one is non-depletable small mineral deposits. So in early access, you'd be familiar with the stone deposits. I want those to be depletable, meaning that they have a limited capacity, and once they're used, they're gone. I like trees to grow back a little bit slower than in vanilla, and I think I'm happy with the rest of the rule set. I don't really use aspirations most of the time. Right now, the only 4 aspirations are the first one, which is do whatever you want, and the other 3, which are focus on a single estate, either labor, kingdom, or clergy. I don't want to do that because I want this gameplay to be fully immersive in terms of having a monastery, a castle, and a thriving town, so I'm going to play on my own. Describing your village, you can update your heraldry, so I'm just going to roll the dice until I see something that I like. That one's quite interesting. I think I'll go with that. Change the village name. There aren't a huge amount of names in here, so I might just choose my own. The titles that you can choose for yourself are limited when you start the game, but you'll get more titles available as you advance. So that's the starting game experience. Really, the biggest thing for me is adding the rule sets where you can change the rules that you play the game by. That is a huge addition, and it's going to really make Foundation much more accessible to different people and their different play styles. The first thing that you're going to notice about the new version of Foundation is that they have completely overhauled the environment. They've redrawn all the trees, and they've added a lot more detail to the vegetation. In the past, where you would have had a uniform layer of grass over the whole map, now you have this mottled effect where the grass is different lengths. Sometimes there's no grass. There are clouds in the sky which obscure the sun, and so there's shadows being cast on the ground. They've added flowers, ferns, bushes, smaller trees. They have sort of a climate thing going on where at lower elevations there are deciduous trees, at higher elevations there are evergreen trees. So the tree line looks natural as it progresses from lower to higher elevations. The mineral nodes and the rocks are also changed. So these are decorative rocks that appear in the landscape. They don't necessarily serve a particular purpose. However, these deposits, which can be either stone or iron, you can see this one is iron from the rust-colored streaks inside it. Those can be set up to be depletable deposits, and so that allows you to mine small amounts early in the game, and then later on you can start to mine the larger deposits, which are found in these cliff structures here, which are similar to what they were before. They've just added a bit of moss and a bit of color to them. One major thing for me from an immersion perspective is the map edges. So if I turn the UI on so that you can see the edges of the map, here I am kind of in the middle of my map. If I scroll out to the edge here, I'll be pushing up against the edge of the map here. I've hit the edge of the map, and if I turn on the territory markings, I can see that this is the white line. This is the buildable area of the map, but now we have all of this territory outside of that, including mountain ranges and long distance views. And that just adds so much when you're building a city and you're looking at that vista to be able to see far off into the distance, even though you can't build there, really adds to the realism of the game, and I just love that aspect of the environment now. We also have the opportunity to change the lighting in the game, which is new. So we always had some rainy seasons and some sunny seasons, I suppose, in the past. Now we can go from daytime to dusk, which will give you this effect of the sun going down, long shadows. Night, which is dark, but still you're able to see, you're still able to play the game. And once we look later on, we'll find that we can light up the night with our town, which is very scenic. And then rainy, which is sort of a dismal, cloudy, misty sort of day. You can also hear that they've updated the nature sounds in Foundation. I haven't fully explored this. This is the first time, the first hour that I'm in the new game. I've been in a playtest version of it until now. Let's talk about artwork. Foundation has always had a particular aesthetic, which is cartoonish, but also fairly realistic, simplistic, but also with a little bit of detail. It is lowish poly, but in a way that is very satisfying. And I think aesthetics can never be something that everybody is going to agree on. Some people love realism. They love everything to look just so. I myself have always been 100% in love with the aesthetic for Foundation, and this release just improves that. You've already seen the environment overhaul, which makes the game softer, a little bit more pastel-y. The buildings have all been reworked. Every single one of them has been redone from the ground up, and they all have a matching aesthetic now. They all have a matching art style, and I love the art style. I think it's fantastic. I think the only drawback to the art style is that it's going to be difficult to mod for it, because the modders are going to have to up their game in terms of the detail of the buildings to make them match the vanilla buildings. One notable change to the art style is the amount of detail that's been added to the buildings. So before, you might have a very simple building with kind of a straightish roof. It might have some interesting design details. Some of them had more than others, but now you're getting a lot more detail. You're getting a lot more props within each building. You're getting kind of galleries and all kinds of stuff. I think they've done a really good job on the detail. Another thing that you get is integrated decorations, or integrated, I suppose, areas where the people will interact. So this guy is warming his hands around the fire while he's waiting to go to work. They'll come and sit on the bench while they're waiting to go to work. Now, one really amazing aspect of the art style, you can see that there's these fires everywhere that I've placed. I'm going to go back to the UI, turn that on, and I'm going to go down to this button here, and I'm going to change the lighting. So we're currently in daytime. I'm going to switch it to night, and you can see that we have, at last, in Foundation, we have light. This is so important. It's so beautiful. I love to see the lights. These are decorations, or they can be built as part of a monument. I've been placing these everywhere. Along the wall here, I've got lots of little lamps, and I just think they add so much to the ambiance of the village. It's fantastic. But I think you'll agree that the art style has just come on leaps and bounds. They've done a really good job. So, animations, I mentioned a little bit about this, but it's fantastic to see all these millers who have nothing to do, probably because the wheat hasn't been harvested yet. They're all just sitting around having naps or talking. A lot of really nice detail. You'll see people, when they're at home, they'll come out and sweep their yards. They'll do different things. The progression menu in Foundation has been completely overhauled. There's a new entry here called Progression, which you can click, and you'll get a full screen view of progression. So it used to be in the book and you had to scroll through it. I suppose In some ways, this is better because it fills up the whole screen. I've gotten used to it. I was a little bit not used to it when it first came out, but it makes sense now. Lots of information on the screen, your current score, so the prosperity score, which dictates how quickly you move up each progression. So right now I'm at 185, so I'm in this third tier of progression. So technically speaking, I could have unlocked everything up until this third tier. In actual fact, what I will get from this for the common path is I will definitely get the third tier, but I'll only get the third tier for the estates if I have the requisite score for that estate. So you can see that splendor is the way that you can achieve this. So I have to build things that add splendor to that estate. Those could be decorations, they could be monuments, it could be any building part that has this little star icon around it. You can see right now I've got 71, so I've unlocked all the way through this one, which requires 25. If I were to get 75 splendor, I would be able to unlock this set here. It's no longer the case that developing one estate will penalize you from the other states. So in the past, if I developed labor, it would make it difficult to develop kingdom and clergy because my score there would go negative. That's no longer the case. So developing in one estate has no effect on developing in the other estate. I think what's improved in Foundation in this version is that there is enough to develop in each estate that really, in order to develop all three estates fully, you're going to get quite a game out of that. You're going to get quite a run. One slightly confusing, but I think once you get into it, it's not really confusing thing, is that decorations can appear both as beautification and as splendor. So, for example, if you build a market, and in that market you have some benches, if you build that within the market monument, which belongs to labor, you will get labor splendor. If you build those benches as part of a monastery, you will get clergy splendor. Or the last option is that you can build the benches just as decorations and they will add beautification. So to distinguish what those things are, splendor is how you progress in that estate. Beautification is actually a requirement in order to upgrade the housing in your village. Taking the bench example, if I want the benches to count towards my progression in the estate, I need to build them within the estate. If I want them to count towards beautification, which will allow me to upgrade the houses for higher status citizens, then I'll build them standalone from the beautification menu. Lots of things have been added to the game in terms of unlocks, and while I'm here in the progression tab, I'm going to highlight some of those things. A lot of this will look familiar, but quite a bit of it is new. Some of the more interesting things that have been added would be the improvements to existing workplaces. So for example, you can expand an existing warehouse with additional depots. You can expand a lumber camp with additional people to work in that lumber camp, or with decorative parts to improve the decoration of that area. There's all kinds of small bits that have been added to the game. A lot of them are really actually quite useful from a gameplay perspective. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is expanding the farms. So you can have a large farm that has many fields, that has many workers, and you can run that all out of a single farmstead. I like that aspect because it results in farms that look quite different from one another because they have lots of different separate individual parts. Other things that have been added, City Market is a completely new monument. This is a higher capacity, higher volume market that is suited toward a third level city, which we'll get to in a minute. And a new monument has been added to the end of labor called the City Belfry, which is kind of like a masterpiece for labor. Kingdom has been overhauled. I don't tend to get deep into Kingdom, and I haven't yet had time to get deep into Kingdom. But the most interesting and important thing is that the wooden keep, which was the old monument in Kingdom, has been replaced by a castle. So you start out with a wooden castle, and you quickly work your way up. You can see the unlock for this is so large you can't actually even see the title of the unlock, but it's basically unlocking the stone castle pieces, which are fantastic. I am so happy that we have now finally a vanilla castle monument in Foundation. It's a beautiful monument. It has lots of different pieces. It's really great, and you're going to have so much fun. If you like to build castles, if you like anything like that, you're going to have a great time with this. There are lots of nuances now to the military. You can build companies of soldiers, and those companies have a specific weapon type. You can create provisions for your soldiers. You can heal them in kind of a hospital type environment. You can have private quarters, which are required for the highest level of knights. There's a lot to do in the Kingdom estate. I do like the Kingdom estate. I like one change which they've made, which you'll see in the game, which is that the companies can be sent out and they just keep going on missions. You don't have to constantly select new missions for the companies. I think that's a really good addition because it was a little bit tedious to use Kingdom in the past. Clergy is largely the same as it has been in the vanilla game. So you start out with a very simple monastery and you progress to a complex one. And then at the end, your abbot is able to build a church, which is kind of like a cathedral. It's really a beautiful, large building. One really important aspect to Foundation that I think was not quite executed well in the past would be walls. So in the past, walls, you could change them, you could add them. There was no cost, there was no building cost to changing them or adding them. And they didn't really have a function other than making sure people didn't walk where you didn't want them to walk. Walls and fortifications now have a huge part to play in the development of your village. You can build many different kinds of walls. There are wooden walls, stone walls, everything in between. And you can start from very rustic walls like this one, all the way up to massive stone castle fortifications. The walls serve a very distinctive purpose. So if I go into my housing, so this is a house inside my wall, you can see that in order for this house to upgrade to allow commoners and above to live in it, it has to be in a desirable neighborhood. That's not changed. It has to have beautification nearby. That hasn't changed. It needs to have a commoner resident. That hasn't changed. So in terms of the status of the villager, none of that has changed until you get into citizens when you need to pave the roads. We'll get to that later. But for housing density, so we start with 2 people per house and we can move up now. You can see this house has 6 people. In order to achieve that, you have to have 2 things. One is called fortification and one is called patrol coverage. So fortification is pretty simple. It means buildings that have some level of fortification. It's usually a tower. So if I go into my build menu, you'll see this little icon here that has a little fence. That's the fortification. And you can see that if I were to build this tower out here in this farm field, you'll see where that fortification value would be. And if I increase the height, I get a bit more fortification the higher the tower goes. Okay. Now I've already got fortification, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'll go here and go to fortification. So you can see that within my walls, I already have fortification, and I have this castle covering even a little bit outside of the walls. So by building a wall and making that wall complete, meaning it's mostly enclosed, there aren't any gaps, there's only gaps where there are gates, the entire town will be fortified. And within that, then every single house will qualify to upgrade density based on fortification. So for second level housing, I just need light fortification, which would be this kind of lower level wall or a tower. I'll need a heavy fortification in order to upgrade to the 3rd tier of housing, which is new to Foundation, and it's very, very different. I'll show you that when I go to a different town in a minute. So fortification is really important, but there are 2 requirements to upgrade the density. It's fortification and patrol coverage. So let's take a look at patrols. Patrols are very simple. If you've used my security mod, you'll be familiar with this kind of mechanic. So within my Lord Manor here, I have a watch post. So in the Manor House, you'll see that I have a Great Hall, a Treasury, and I have this watch post. So if I click again on the sub-building, you'll see that I have 2 different types of workers. I have patrollers, which is what we're talking about now, and I have watchmen. So let's talk about patrollers. Patrollers go around the town and they basically visit houses in turn in order to ensure the safety of that area. And there's a new zone for patrolling, so it's this patrol zone. You can see that I've highlighted some of the houses in my village, most of the houses in my village. That's my way of saying I want this house to upgrade. I want the patrols to visit these houses. If I don't have enough patrollers, what they will do is they'll go out to the nearest houses. They'll all meet the patrol requirement for those houses. You can see that, for example, these houses' requirement is green. This house here is red. This house does not have enough patrols, so there's not enough workers. So I need to either add more workers or I need to increase the capacity of my watch post or add a second watch post. Either way, you'll see the patrols walking around the town, especially in patrol mode, where you can see them visiting each house in turn. So as they visit, you'll see that circle increase, and it increases every time they visit. And it decreases over time as well. So patrol and safety, that all requires constant vigilance by those patrols. Okay. So those 2 requirements together, the patrols and the fortification, that's what dictates which houses can upgrade. There is another mechanic, which is creating fortification not through walls, but through fortifications, for lack of a better word. And a lot of those fortifications require workers in order to create the fortification. So if we go here to the fortification menu, you'll see that I have walls and I also have a watchtower. So I can plant this watchtower anywhere, just like the church tower, and it will create a level of fortification in its radius, in its zone. And it will require a watch person or a watchman to go out and sit in that tower to create the safety feature. So if I build this tower, those people who I've employed as watchmen, currently I don't have any, going back here, if I were to employ people as watchmen, they would go out to those towers, visit the tower, and that creates fortification in that specific area. So it's a combination of a building, which is usually a tower, and a watchman going out to the building in order to create fortification. So that's another option. If you have, let's say, an area outside of your town wall and you want it to increase in density, you would build a watch post, you'd build a watchtower. The guys would go out there, they automatically pick a place to go. They'll go out there and they'll create fortification, which then allows you to upgrade this area in terms of density. Really welcome mechanics. I think all of those mechanics make a lot of sense. Another really great feature, which is also partly, I think, kind of reflected in my security mod currently, is that you can use soldiers to create the safety mechanic as well. So soldiers from the castle can also go out on patrol. So you can either basically have a city guard, which have their own little wooden kind of staffs, or you can see the city guard here. These are the patrollers. Or you can have soldiers, companies of soldiers who patrol the town, and they also will create that mechanic of safety. Fantastic addition. It's basically how you increase the density of your villages, and it makes walls make sense for the first time. Next change that I want to highlight is Pastures, something that I have asked for and hoped for a long time, a much more realistic way to manage livestock in Foundation. In the past, you would spawn livestock from the barn. They would kind of stay within a radius of the barn, but it was really difficult to understand what that radius was, and if something was in the way, they would kind of wander around and make a big mess. A much welcome change has been that barns now get a paintable pasture. So if I turn on the UI, click on the barn, I see that I've painted this pasture here. I get an indication of whether that pasture is roughly the right size for the number of workers that I have. And the number of workers for each barn has increased. If you want smaller pastures, of course, you can use fewer workers, or you can just overwork the same pasture. There's not really any penalty to doing that. Animals will spawn automatically from the barn to fill the pasture. They will stay in the pasture. And best of all, the pasture has its own sort of look to it. So you can see here's a difference between the grass in the game and the grass in the pasture. It's a bit darker. It has these weeds that would be typical of a cow pasture. If I go over here to the sheep farm, our iconic Foundation sheep have been replaced by actual animated sheep, which I think is a win, although some people will definitely miss those weird roller skating sheep with the gigantic poofy bodies. I do like the new sheep, and similarly they have a new barn style, so a lovely open barn at the end. They have 2 workers, 2 shepherds for the sheep farm, and they employ the same pasture mechanic as the cattle farms. So very welcome. It's actually nice too that the pastures kind of integrate within each other. So I have 3 different pastures. Oh, where's the other barn? There, that barn there. But there's no dividing line between them, so you can see that it kind of integrates seamlessly. So you get these large expanses of pasture land. Love the look, love the animations of the animals. I love the fact that you can control exactly where the pasture is. A very welcome improvement. I would say the only thing that would be missing for me would be some sense of fertility. So, using, let's say, really steep or high elevation pastures would perhaps have lower productivity than lower elevation, flatter pastures, but I'm not going to be picky. I think this is a great change. Another nice thing is that the pastures are not really exclusive. So you can see here I zoned it for pasture, but then I also zoned it for housing. So I can have the cattle workers living in huts very near the barn. It just increases the realism, makes it all look like it's integrated properly. A minor, but I think interesting and important aspect of the aesthetics of the game that has been changed is the path widths. So in the past, the paths were all the same width. Basically, the only difference was as workers, as people started to trample the path, originally it would be kind of faint, and over time it would be a complete path. Now what happens is it does start that way, so the paths can be quite faint when they're first being established. You can see, for example, here some faint paths. But if a path is well used, it will not only become more established, but it becomes wider. So you can see that this main trunk road here is quite well used, and it becomes less and less used as it gets down to the end here. In the town itself, you can see that one of my main thoroughfares along here is very wide, whereas some of the other paths are very narrow. So I love that aspect. It's a small change, but it actually makes the village look a lot more realistic. It makes the main roads look a lot more realistic. And when we go and look at paved roads later, you're going to see that this art style has an impact in terms of gameplay. Folks, that is me out of time for today. I'm delighted to have reviewed some of the changes that you will see as you play Foundation for the first time in version 1.0. I hope you have a lot of fun. I hope that soon modding will become available in the new version and that we'll get to start working on those mods. I do anticipate that there's a lot of work to do with modding in order to get everything to work with the new version. I think the team also has some work to do on their side to make it compatible with mods. So looking forward to testing, playing the versions, developing new content for you, and I hope you've enjoyed this video.